Hey everyone, this is Cleofe back to you. This podcast deep dive is on divine victory. In 624 CE, during the holy month of Ramadan, a small group of 313 Muslims faced a huge army of 950 Quraysh fighters in the Battle of Badr. Led by Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, the Muslims were not well armed but had strong faith. This wasn't just a fight, it was a test of belief and courage. The Prophet prayed deeply to Allah, asking for help to save Islam. The battle started with a brave duel where three Muslims, Ali, Hamza, and Ubaidah, fought fearlessly. The Prophet fought alongside his people, showing true leadership. The Quran says Allah sent angels to help the Muslims win. This victory showed that faith in Allah brings success. The Muslims treated their enemies kindly, freeing some prisoners if they taught others to read, showing Islam's love for knowledge. The Battle of Badr was the start of Islam's growth, proving that faith and mercy are stronger than any army. Now, let's move on to the deep dive.
Okay, let's dive in. We're looking at a moment our source material from the Triumph of Badr calls a triumph of faith. And wow, those numbers just leap out, don't they? 313 against 950.
They really do. Talk about facing long odds. And this source uses that contrast, a huge difference in numbers, as sort of central to understanding the Battle of Badr.
First back in 624 CE.
Yeah, exactly. 624 CE, during Ramadan in the Valley of Badr. Our goal here really is just to unpack how this particular text presents the battle, the lead up, the fight, the aftermath, based purely on these excerpts.
Got it. So according to the Triumph of Badr, what's the setup? Who are these two groups?
Well, the source describes it as the new Muslim community, recently settled in Medina, quite vulnerable still.
Okay.
And they're up against the Quraysh from Mecca, powerful, established, much better armed.
And the immediate trigger, the source says, was about a caravan.
Right. It started, according to the text, with an attempt to intercept a Quraysh trade caravan. But that escalated pretty quickly into this major confrontation.
Makes sense. What about motivations? How does the source paint those?
It draws a really stark contrast. For the Quraysh, it says they were protecting their trade routes, naturally, but also driven by pride. The text uses words like arrogance and mentions them being funded by ill-gotten wealth.
Strong words.
Yeah. And it explicitly states they underestimated the Muslims' resolve.
And the Muslims, the 313.
They're depicted completely differently. Poorly equipped materially is the phrase used, rich in faith, and led, of course, by the Prophet Muhammad.
So the source really leans into this faith versus material power dynamic.
Absolutely. And that leads into how it presents the Prophet's leadership. It wasn't just one thing.
How so?
Well, it highlights both the spiritual side, describing his intense prayers, his heartfelt supplications for Islam's survival, and his strategic thinking. Very practical. The source points specifically to him securing the wells at Badr.
Ah, the water source. That would be a huge tactical advantage in the desert, wouldn't it?
Exactly. The source frames it as a key strategic move, giving them a vital edge. It shows this blend of, faith and practical action.
Interesting. So moving to the battle itself, how does the source describe the action? Any key moments that stand out in the text?
It paints a pretty vivid picture. It mentions the Mubaraza right at the start.
Duels.
Yeah, those traditional single combats before the main clash. The source names Ali, Hamza, Ubaidah stepping forward for the Muslims. It gives it a very dramatic opening.
Okay.
The text also notes the Prophet himself was fighting alongside everyone else. And it describes the Muslims shouting takbir.
Takbir.
Right. The source explains this as cries affirming God's greatness, like a battle cry rooted in faith.
Precisely. The source presents it as something that clearly boosted their morale, their conviction. It's woven into the narrative of their strength.
And this ties into another element the source really emphasizes, doesn't it? The idea of divine help.
Definitely. The text is very explicit about this. It mentions angels coming down to support the Muslim fighters.
Wow, okay. And it even includes that quote from the Quran, "You did not throw when you threw, but Allah threw."
So the source directly attributes part of the outcome to divine intervention.
Yes. It presents that intervention as a core part of why this vastly outnumbered group was victorious. It's integral to the source's telling of a faith-driven victory. We're just relaying how the source presents it, of course.
Understood. So despite everything, the numbers, the equipment, the source reports a decisive Muslim victory. Key Quraysh leaders fell.
A clear win, yes. But what the source seems to find just as important, maybe even more surprising, is what happened after.
The aftermath. You mean with the prisoners?
Exactly. The source makes a point of saying they were treated with dignity, which, wasn't always the standard practice then.
A different approach.
A very different approach described here. And maybe the most remarkable detail the source includes. Some prisoners could earn their freedom by teaching.
Teaching? Teaching what?
Teaching basic literacy, reading and writing to Muslims who couldn't.
Seriously, after a battle...
That's what the source says. And it frames this as evidence of Islam's commitment to knowledge right from these early days, even amidst conflict.
So this source, the Triumph of Badr, it's doing more than just recounting military history.
Oh, much more. It's clearly constructing a narrative. It presents Badr as a foundational story about the power of Iman, of faith, combined with leadership.
And not just victory, but also values like mercy, learning.
Exactly. Those are presented as integral parts of the triumph, not just side notes.
So if we step back and look at the source's whole picture, what's the main idea it seems to want you, the listener, to take away?
I think it's that stark contrast again. The Quraysh, portrayed with arrogance, rely on a wealth described as ill-gotten, facing the Muslims, portrayed with humility, relying on faith.
And the source connects that directly to the result.
Explicitly. It attributes the victory ultimately to Allah, linking the spiritual condition and the actions taken, both strategic and merciful, to the final outcome and the legacy.
It really makes you think about how this specific source connects inner faith, practical strategy, and those outward acts of mercy and valuing knowledge. What does this text suggest triumph really means? A question worth pondering.